Here they come. Well, welcome everybody. I guess people still are rolling in. We're going to get started though, because I'm a time freak, no, because I like to get started. We have a lot of things to cover. And the first few minutes are kind of preliminaries. We live in a rural community, and a lot of the things that we are experiencing, we experience often in a kind of a silo because we're so busy with our lives that we don't relate them to a bigger picture. But there are people who actually are looking at rural America as a whole. And our guest today, Joe Bartmann, is one of those people. And his organization, Dakota Resources, of which he's the president of that, is very much involved in looking for solutions to those problems that we have and accentuating the things that we're doing right in trying to make rural life better for all of us. So with that, welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Hi.
Can you first start off by giving us a kind of 50,000-foot view or elevator speech, however you like to call it, of who Joe Bartmann is? Where were you born, brothers or sisters? What's your favorite color of shoes? Whatever you think is relevant.
Sure. Yeah. So hi everybody. My name is Joe Bartmann. I actually grew up on a farm in McCook County, South Dakota, which is near Lake Vermilion, if anybody knows where that is, just west of Sioux Falls, about 30, 40 miles. So yeah, I grew up on a family operation. My dad and his two brothers and all the family, we kind of grew up together, and my grandparents also lived on the main farm there. So we were all within a mile or two of each other, and grew up as one big family on that farm operation. And I've actually only moved about 8 miles from there. So I now live in Montrose, and that's a town of about 500 people, just off I-90. If you're driving on I-90 and you see the big bull's head sculpture, that's Montrose. I live just a couple miles north of that. And so I've lived in South Dakota my whole life. Lived in Vermilion for a few years, going to school. And I worked, my first job out of college was with Downtown Sioux Falls, Inc. And so I spent the first part of my career working in sort of what felt to me like a small town within this big town in the downtown neighborhood, which has, changed a lot since then. And from there, I went back home to McCook County. The local Ford dealer in Salem, South Dakota called me and said, "Hey, could you come talk to us? We're trying to start up this economic development organization countywide in McCook County. Maybe you can help us figure it out." And by the end of the meeting, I was going to come run it. So from there, I've been in rural economic development ever since, and been here at Dakota Resources for almost 9 years now, and been president for about 4 or so of those. I have 4 daughters. 2 of them are at Dakota Wesleyan in Mitchell, and a senior, going to be a senior in high school, and a 7th grader. And my wife and I have raised them in Montrose. And yeah, I grew up with 3 siblings. So 4 of us, 3 of us are still in the area here, and 1 in Colorado. Yeah, and my shoes. So that may be an inside joke, but because Lawrence and I were at an event together yesterday, and I was wearing bright pink shoes. And so yeah, I'm a sneakerhead as well. One of my hobbies, and so I have a lot of very colorful shoes.
Yeah, That's what I like about you.
Yeah, it's pretty much, plain grays and blacks from head to toe, except the shoes. That's how I roll.
And I'm certain in the circles that you go into, if they don't remember you, they do remember your shoes.
They do. I get a lot of comments. So
yeah, they say, "Who that? The shoe guy, the shoe guy."
yeah.
So let's talk about rural communities. What would you say is the state of rural communities in general now? How would you describe that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot different than when I was growing up in a rural community. It you know when I started in rural economic development, I started by doing a lot of research and digging in to try to understand, because it was sort of a shift. Even though I grew up in a small town, working in Sioux Falls was very different than working in, even though I had a lot of similarities. And so, what I found or learned is that really the sort of decline or the slow death of rural communities started about, I guess it's now been 80 or 90 years ago here in South Dakota, in this part of the country, particularly. And so there was this peak where small towns sort of first burst onto the scene and really grew fast, a lot of them, and then started shrinking. And not just losing people, but losing resources and losing businesses and losing transportation opportunities and all kinds of things just started going away in a lot of those small towns. And as people and resources begin to sort of gather in the bigger towns and cities across this part of the country. And so I went about my work thinking, look, it took us 70 or 80 years to get into this mess that we're in. And most communities at that point, which would have been now almost 20 years ago, were really sort of like, we don't know what to do. We know that things are getting worse. We know that we love this place, and we just don't know what to do. And so I and my colleagues that I've worked with over the years, we keep showing up and saying, yeah, we get that. We don't have the answer for you either, but we believe you do. And we can help you discover it within yourselves and help you get more people involved in discovering that together as a community. So that's been the approach. I think what has shifted since then over those 20 years is there's a lot more hope these days. There's a lot more sort of the future looks a little brighter, and maybe we can actually make it. Maybe we can actually turn this community that has felt like it was dying for 2 or 3 generations into something that feels like it's thriving. And I think a big part of that shift is that a lot of people have changed the goal from growth being the only thing that matters. This is the only way to measure if we are doing well as a rural community, to, hey, is this a place that people who live here like to live? Do people here love this place? And do people here care about it enough to help make it a place that we all like better and better? Instead of thinking about somebody else out there and what they might want our community to be, we think about what do the people who already live here want? And how do we double down on that instead of focusing so much on swinging for the fences and getting, this big home run, which for years and years, the thing that every community seemed to be looking for was, can we land this big employer from somewhere else who, typically is just looking for who will pay me the most to come move to their community and who will help me the most to recruit all my employees. And so there's nothing that, we shouldn't be surprised when 10 years down the road, they pick up and go somewhere else to another community, right? And so that, was a quick hit, temporary fix for a lot of communities, gave them a lot of adrenaline, and they felt like, hey, things are really rocking now. And then that community or that business moves and it devastates that community. And so this sort of smaller, more patient, more intentional, more inclusive growth of loving where you live, which was the theme of the event that Lawrence and I attended yesterday. That's really what I think I've seen evolve and emerge over the last 20 years. It's the shift toward that.
As you mentioned those things, one of the things that comes to mind is whether or not these communities are networking and are aware of their mutual concerns and are able to work on their mutual concerns together. And I will say also that one of the things that makes me think about that is I grew up in San Francisco, which is, one of the larger cities in the US, especially when you look at the whole Bay Area. And one of the things I noticed when I came here is that the difference between where I lived, grew up in, and Roslyn, South Dakota, where I live now, is mostly just kind of distance. Because in terms of mentality, the communities kind of keep to themselves. So I'm just wondering, have you seen, or can you talk a little bit about the connectivity or the networking, both how it is and its potential in rural America?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because I think it really is another way of looking at the shift that I was talking about. Because when you are focused as a community on, the only way that we can feel successful is if we are recruiting this big company, or if we are landing, 20 new families. And if we're able to keep our school open when the one down the road closes, if those are the goals, if those are the measures of success, then of course we're competitive and we don't want to connect with each other and we don't want to share ideas and we don't want to help build each other's capacity. We don't see that when your community gets stronger, mine does too. And that's been a part of this shift from sort of growth from the outside to growth from within. And when we're focusing on just making this place the best place possible for those of us who choose to call it home, then connecting to others and networking and sharing and being vulnerable about what we don't know what to do and what's troubling us, and sharing, hey, we figured this thing out, or we tried this and it failed miserably, but here's what we think you could do. Those kind of things become a lot easier to do. And I think that's been a big shift that we've seen, and that really Dakota Resources has played a big role in South Dakota, at least, where helping the local leaders in our rural communities to recognize that we're all in this together, that we have a lot of similar issues that we're trying to figure out how to overcome, and that people, while you may love Roslyn and I may love Montrose, the things that we love are often very similar about those places. And that's the thing that I think makes it easier for those leaders, especially in the smaller communities, to really network, share resources and ideas and troubles and vulnerabilities, and rely on each other. I think that's been the thing that has even surprised me over the last, so COVID for all of us obviously shifted our lives dramatically in so many ways. One of the ways that it shifted the lives of local economic development leaders in rural places is they had to connect with each other because there was nothing else we could do. And you've been showing up a lot since COVID hit. We started doing these just open coffee breaks, virtual coffee breaks. We were doing them every weekday during the first year of COVID. We now do them twice a week still. But, it was sort of like, we'll create a space. Whoever wants to show up, talk about whatever you want to talk about. And just that sort of rhythm of like, yep, if I'm able to jump on today, I'll jump on and I'll connect with other rural shapers. And if not, it's no big deal. There's not an agenda anyway that I'm missing. And it's from there, our Learning Network program, which is one of the 5 programs that we run that are all sort of a different approach to our mission, but interconnected, has exploded. And I think has become part of everyday life for a lot of local rural leaders.
What kind of things can you see that examples of networking possibilities for rural communities, especially if you've seen people actually do it, you know.
Yeah. Well, so two things come to mind. One is, we had one of those coffee breaks. Some conversations came up around bylaws for economic development organizations and how so many people. Somebody asked a question about, hey, what do your bylaws say about this or that? And so many people on the call were like, I have no idea what my bylaws say. I've never looked at them. I don't know if my board knows any. I don't know where they are. We got to find them. So it sort of started this conversation about that. And all of a sudden, a group of people who were on that call just self-organized. And these are people from, 6 different communities. They came together and said, hey, we're going to figure this out. We're going to help each other figure it out. And we're going to share it with the whole network. And so they did. They created a little playbook, in a sense, on how do you actually, what are the things your bylaws need to cover? What are the things that we could do? And that led to a course that that group asked us to put together, which we did, which was about, hey, here are 5 policies that can be really helpful to your nonprofit, to your economic development nonprofit. And because COVID was happening, people had some time to actually think about how to work on their organization instead of just in it. And so that came about, and now people on our learning network are sharing their bylaws and their board policies, and how do we run meetings and all this sort of stuff about how do you actually run the organization itself. And that just really came out of people coming together on a Zoom call just like this and saying, I don't know how the heck to do this. And a bunch of other people said, I don't either. Let's figure it out together. So that's one example. Maybe I'll just stop there. I could share more stories, but I know we have limited time.
Well, I was thinking actually about some projects that people did. That's certainly a project too.
Sure.
I was thinking about certain projects that people might have done or could do. Some examples so that those of us who are on this Zoom call might see something, that a way to do something ourselves, or maybe be inspired to go to another town and see if we can recruit some co-conspirators for some project.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that emerged from an event we had before COVID, we had a muralist, a community muralist, come and at a conference that we put on, and she actually talked about how she works with communities to develop these murals together as a community, and then helps the community actually paint them and create these murals and that sort of thing. And we actually created a mural together at the event. So about 200 people all sort of made a mural in the hallway. What happened after that was a whole bunch of people who were there said, wait, how do we do that? Can we do this? And what we started to see were that people who had been at that event were connecting with each other and figuring it out and working with different artists from across the state. And at least a dozen communities in South Dakota ended up doing a pretty significant community mural project, which they use not just as a sort of way to beautify the community, make it more interesting, but also as a way to engage the community and sort of shaping, like, what do we want this mural to tell? What story do we want it to tell about us? And how can we actually all come together and let anybody, a 90-year-old or a 4-year-old, come paint a part of this thing? And it doesn't take a lot of money. It takes, a building owner who's willing to let you paint the side of their building. It helps to work with an artist, but some have even done it, with just local volunteer artists. And it's something that's very tangible, very visible in a community, but not a big expensive project, and not a thing that you have to go through a lot of hoops to get approved or anything like that. And it was something that every community could do in a unique way, but could help each other figure out how to do it. what the process looked like, even though the project itself looked different in every community. And so now this has happened. I don't know the count, I've lost count, but it's 20 plus communities across South Dakota have done community mural projects since then.
That's very interesting. As you were talking about that and the development of it, it called to mind, and I think it was the Grateful Dead who were the first ones to do it, that they got one. I think it was the old Russian consulate that they bought, and it had a lot of, let's say, I don't even know what you call it, shingles kind of things on the front of the building. And they went into painting them all these psychedelic colors. And it wasn't more than a year after that became such a thing that in San Francisco, that it became like postcards. People were making postcards. And it was one of the popular postcards in San Francisco is all these houses, they were painted these wild colors. So it seems to me that we have, as the graffiti artists would call it, fresh wall all over. Yeah. Especially when you tear down one building and you have this now exposed side that nobody bothered to do anything with, because why do it when you're never going to see that? Well, now we do see it, and you can take something that is likely to be an eyesore and turn it into a work of art. That can't be all bad, especially if, as you say, the whole community gets together and we're not just developing that building, we're developing the people in our community.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the other thing it does is it begins to shift some of the sort of power in the community in a subtle way. And that's a big part of what we try to do here, and what I've been trying to do my whole career, is to help communities understand that well-intentioned small group of people who usually look a lot like me, and are, but maybe a little older, and are trying their darndest to help the community, but end up just sort of hoarding all the decision making and hoarding all the, like, we know what's best, we'll decide, that a mural is not a great use of resources, right? We could put that into promoting our community somehow or whatever. Well, look at Falkton, for example. The mural that community created, and actually the Development Corp was one of the partners that helped make it happen. So that was a big sort of, opening to their mindset. But that has become not just a source of community pride and a thing to say, yeah, this is part of why I love living here in Falkton, but a tourist attraction, and something that they can actually has given them millions of dollars worth of free advertising and marketing, as people talk about it and the state features it and whatever, because it's this gigantic mural on the side of elevators.
And I think one of the other words with that free is effective.
Yeah.
Because in terms of like the dollar, well, you didn't spend the dollars, but even if you did spend the dollars, they typically aren't as effective if you just bought advertising, right, as if you do something that is a news story rather than just say, hey, come cover our Tiddlywinks concert.
Yes.
Unless you have, maybe that could be a thing too, but
yeah,
but just bringing people together and bringing those resources, human resources especially, to the table, I think that's something, especially when you consider that if a town doesn't really feel good about itself, if your kids don't feel good about they want to be from there, not there.
Yeah, that's right.
When you have that working against you, and your children are thinking about leaving before the ink dries on their high school diploma, doesn't matter how many people you recruit. In fact, you're going to start feeling like an outsider because everybody is from out of town. Yeah. Whereas if you go from the inside, at least you can feel like, I know these people, you have connection with them, and still feel like you're part of it. So it just seems like a win-win, this whole networking approach.
Totally. And I think the other thing that it does is it starts to shift a little bit of this mindset of, that economic and community development
Mm.
is focusing on people outside of our community, and it's focusing on the creativity and unleashing the creativity of so many people in our community, whether that's about painting a mural or about starting a business or about creating a community gathering of some sort. I mean, it opens up all kinds of invitation to people to make stuff, to create stuff, create more community in that place that they love.
Excellent. Let's look at some of the similarities between other rural communities and our local ones here in South Dakota. However, before we do that, I would like to throw out to our other esteemed panel here, all the people on this call, that's you. Do you have any questions or comments on rural America or Dakota Resources? You have questions about that? I want to bring any and all of you into our conversation. Anybody? Kevin?
Yes, Joe, I'm wondering, Kevin Worcester.
Hi.
Hi. First of all, if there's a common issue that all these communities face, and I jumped on a little late, so if you address that, I apologize.
Hmm.
And as you look at projects, can these be bike paths, fishing ponds, community theaters, hog processing plants? I mean, what kind of range are you looking at for things that you might do?
Well, I'll start with the second part, if that's okay, Kevin, and come back to the first part. So what the project is in a community really doesn't matter to me or to us at Dakota Resources. We are, when we go into a community, the first thing I usually say when I get asked to come into a community and they say, can you come help us? I say, well, I guess I have to tell you two things. One, I don't have any idea what you need to do. I don't have the answer for you. And the second part is, I believe you do. And so what we can help you do is we can help you sort of discover that and unleash that creativity here in your community. And what that's going to require is a significant shift in the way power is held in a community. So if there's, often it's, 8 to 10 white guys sitting around a table saying, what should our economic development court be doing? And usually our first answer is, get out of the way. And so we're not, we're not out there saying you should do this industrial park, you should start this hog operation, you should build this bike path. We're out there saying you should give away the power and resources and open it up to make every idea valuable here and let people work on and create whatever the heck they want to create and work on, instead of creating this sort of gated process where a few people decide what's good for the community and most people are left out of that. That's the key. That's the central idea that we're trying to bring into a community. And so I think the answer to the first part of your question, what's the common thread? What's the common issue that we see out there? It's this tightly held, even though really well-intentioned group of people who are holding on to the power in that community because that's the only way they know how to do it. And they have a lot of blind spots. For one thing, a lot of times people will say, okay, well, let's have a community meeting and we'll ask the community what they want. And I will say, that's not empowering the community. Inclusion is a great step toward empowering, but it's not empowering. Inclusion is, we can create a great invitation that is very welcoming and inviting and makes people feel like they're stepping into a safe space. But if at the end of that, the same group of people hold more power than the rest of those who showed up, we haven't really accomplished any sort of empowering the community. And so it means that people who have been working their butts off on this have to be humble enough to say, I guess what we've been doing hasn't done it yet. Let's get out of the way and try something else. Let's support the heck out of whoever wants to try something in our community. And sometimes that means we have to, get a whole bunch of people in our community behind this idea. Sometimes it means one person can go start something. In a community, I won't name the community, but in one community a few years back, we were having one of those meetings and there were two people and they're like, I don't want to stay in this meeting anymore. I want to go do something right now. We're like, awesome, go do it. And they went down the street, went into a bar restaurant, because we were talking about how, people just want to sit outside and we don't have any outdoor seating in this community. So they went into this place. They said, hey, if we set it up for you, would you let us set up an outdoor seating thing here just for the weekend? This was on a Friday. Can we set it up for tomorrow? Just see what happens. And they were like, well, but is that legal? Will the city let us do that? And like, we'll talk to the city for you. Well, they went to the Parks Department and not the city administrator, and asked the parks guys to help them get this set up. And the parks guys were like, oh yeah, we have barricades, we have some pallets, we can, we even have these trees and these big barrels we can bring down. So they'd set up, they got these lights and they set up these tables outside. By the time we were done with the meeting, they had this set up and people walked out and were like, wow. And of course it filled up immediately, right? With customers and people and who wanted to sit there and experience this. Then they went and got the city administrator and the mayor and said, hey, come see this. And of course, the mayor and city administrator had no choice but to say, yeah, we need more of this because there's a whole bunch of people loving this right now on Main Street. So that's just a little example of sometimes like, we need to stop asking for permission to do something in our community and just go do it. And sometimes that's one or two people, and sometimes it's a project that requires a whole bunch of people getting behind it.
Often I find that when there are the impediments to things like that, a lot of laws get written just because they're responding to a crisis management. A thing happens, somebody says, do something. Mm-hmm. And then they write a law that has nothing to do with anything except that thing that already happened has a snowball's chance in Hades of happening again, but they have now a law, and that law seems to indicate that other things can't be done. And so pretty soon you feel imprisoned by unknown laws, even things that you get told so many times that it's no because there's a law against it. You just figure if nobody's doing it, there's probably a law against it.
Right.
So did you have any the other part of your question get answered, Kevin?
I just follow up. Is money a problem, or is the money available and you just need to set up this framework of ideas and corporate, and sharing? And how much money's out there for these communities if they do come up with real significant plans or projects?
It's a great question. And yeah, of course, money's a problem. During the last couple of years, been a lot more resources available to communities because of the, different COVID dollars of different kinds. And I think for a bit there, rural economic and community development was a hot button issue for a lot of foundations as well. So a lot of philanthropic money came into rural communities, usually more through organizations like ours and others like us who serve a whole bunch of local communities. And then we were able to help them with programs and things. But yeah, money is always an issue. And so one of the things that we're often encouraging the community to think about is what is a really small bet you can make. When you put everything you've got into this industrial park and putting up a building and then hoping that some big employer shows up. And to get them to show up, you got to literally pay them to come. All of a sudden, that's like, it's all or nothing. Either that works, or we're setting our community back for 20 years. And so in some cases, there are some great home runs, and the communities that are really good at that are typically the ones who are a little bigger, who are, 5 to 10,000 or more. And then we don't have very many of those in South Dakota. But if you get below 5,000, that's a really big bet to make. And so we're often talking about small bets. What's a small bet we can make that isn't super expensive, that isn't going to change everything for us, but is going to help us start stepping down that path and figuring out what the next bet is we should take, and the next and the next and the next. And the other thing that we do is we recognize that those economic development organizations have to have some financial capacity if we're going to be successful long term. So we actually have a pretty unique lending program that is designed to help them build up their balance sheets so that they're able to leverage other dollars from other sources, whether that's loan capital or that's grants or whatever, or sometimes it's a TIF, a tax increment financing district. They can use our dollars that we provide to them with no collateral, with a fixed interest rate for 10 years, and they only pay us interest for 10 years. And then we usually just refinance it at the end of 10 years. So we're using money, putting it to work in a community, charging just enough to cover our expenses, and not really ever asking them to pay the principal back. And then they're able to use that. They don't have to leverage the building or the property they own against it. They're able to then use that property or whatever they bought with our money to access more resources. So that's a long game. I mean, it's not something that happens in a month or a year. It's something that communities are building over decades. But that's one of the approaches that we take. In fact, it was the idea came 26 years ago. Senator Tom Daschle was the one who really secured the funding to start this program, and recruited a handful of banks and healthcare systems and others with some extra money to put into the communities, to invest in communities, and created this fund that we now are still deploying out there.
Daschle, the guy who didn't do anything for South Dakota?
That's the guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that always amazes me. That's a couple of things you brought up that are worth kind of circling around for a moment. One is the idea of small projects. I've been a promoter of the multi-leg stool for some time now, as opposed to having a one-legged stool or two-legged stools. I've never found them so stable. And I like the idea of like starting small and starting with small projects. Can you talk a little bit more about maybe some of the unseen advantages of that approach to economic development, the help the small guy do big things, or even a lot of small guys do a lot of little things?
Yeah. So, which story should I cherry pick? So one of the things that we put a lot of resources into about 12, 13 years ago was into helping communities to build a culture for entrepreneurship in their community. And what we mean by that is, instead of, at that time at least, most communities, large and small, were putting all of their economic development dollars into recruiting. And we said, well, what if, in a small town, it's like, how many of you have actually had success with that? It's very few, right? Very small percentage. And so what if we took most of that money, and instead of trying to, stand out in a sea of small towns begging companies to move there, what if we invested that same money in people here who are starting a new business, or who have something started, but they need some help to make that leap to the next level where they're actually creating a great economic impact in our community, where they're able to, what if we create and grow our own large employers and businesses who bring dollars from outside of our community, because that's really what a community needs. If we're going to grow, we need to be bringing dollars from outside that community into our community. There's no other way to actually grow our local economy, right? And so what we found is that it doesn't actually take a lot of money. It's actually pretty affordable to support an entrepreneur and help them learn how. And this is the thing, we focused not so much on the startup phase because there was a lot of resources there, and not so much on the sort of stage 3 entrepreneur, which is, they've made it past the startup phase. They're growing like crazy. They're already becoming a big business. We focused on that little gap in between. And instead of providing money, we provided a training. We provided a fellowship for those second stage entrepreneurs who were just beyond startup. Like, in other words, they're probably going to make it as a business, but they were wanting to make it to the next level where the shift is from working in my business, whatever my craft is, to working on my business, so that I am hiring people to work in it instead of me working in it. That's the thing. That was the sort of leverage point that we figured out was really what could help businesses to explode and to create our own sort of gazelles is a term in the entrepreneur world. Create our own gazelles locally. Not everybody did it. What happened is that a lot of the people in that fellowship went from a small struggling business to a strong small business, and some went from a small business with a lot of potential to something really big and made a great impact in those communities, and still make. And what we found is that when those entrepreneurs learned how to learn from each other and to actually spend all of their time working on the business instead of in it, they also found time to be leaders in their community. They found more time to serve on the development corp, or run for city council, or run for school board, or really get involved in developing the next wave of local entrepreneurs. And that ended up being, I think, the biggest impact of that whole program, was that we helped entrepreneurs go from struggling startup to mentor in their community.
Speaking of power, one of the things that I've noticed is that when we talk about going from a very vertical to something resembling more horizontal power structure,
Mm-hmm.
one of the impediments is that most people grow up thinking of life in a very vertical power structure. And to get them to be a part of something bigger and to actually taking power seems to be something of a mind trick to get people to be motivated to take power, especially when it's not take power over other people, but take power by your contribution to getting things done. How do you navigate that, or how have you seen that been navigated, or is it still mostly a problem for most people?
Well, I wish I could say got it all figured out, but it certainly don't. I mean, it's something that is, I think, the biggest thing in the way of our small communities here in South Dakota, and probably every community in this country. It's a puzzle that we haven't solved. Because, as I mentioned earlier, what it requires is people who have been experiencing more opportunity, to help create a line, sort of a line for those opportunities, and then put themselves at the back of it. And that is the toughest challenge. It's not convincing people who've not been involved or who've been sort of left out or kept out of the decision making. It's not about convincing them to get involved. It's about convincing the people who are holding that power right now. Again, often really well-intentioned people who have a total blind spot about how they're keeping other people out. They have to get out of the way. They have to open the door, and not just open the door to say, come get on our bus, but to say, let's build a whole new bus and let's let you design it instead of me design it as the person who's been in power. And, it may sound like I'm talking politics here. I'm talking community here. And, our community structure is built on that vertical power system that you're talking about, Lawrence. And so it's sort of what we're talking about is decentralizing that power. The word empower, which is right in our mission. So it's something that I am compelled to work on every single day as long as I work for Dakota Resources, is a word that's so misunderstood, I think. And it literally means to give away power. And I think we think about it differently. We think about it from the perspective of, let's invite more people in, when instead what we need to be doing is saying, let me get out of the way so that you can have the stage.
Interesting. Anyone else have questions or comments?
Just a question. I noticed you're based in Renner, Joe.
True.
When I think of Renner, I work for the Argus Leader, but I haven't been in Sioux Falls or worked for the Argus for 20 years. And when I think of Renner, I think of the Renner Monarchs baseball team. I think of the Renner Corner Locker.
Yep.
I think of spring flooding stories in Renner.
Yes.
What's going on in Renner these days? Anything new and exciting? Or
well, if you came to Renner today and you haven't been here in a few years, you might not recognize it very much because, as you said, we're really close to Sioux Falls here, and so it has the Renner Corner Locker is still here and still sort of the centerpiece of the community. They've expanded. Just today, they're finishing up, I think, adding on to Renner Corner Locker, but they're also building a whole new facility to take their beef jerky that everybody loves and actually mass produce it so that they're going to be shipping it all over the country. We're actually in a building across the parking lot from Renner Corner Locker that's owned by the same family, the Safari Bar and Grill here. We're in the back of that building. Yeah, so I think Renner is changing, right? It's not this small little town that everybody shows up for the baseball game anymore. There's a whole lot of people that don't know each other who live here in the Renner area. And part of the reason that we landed in Renner about 10 years ago was really to try and sort of not be so attached to any particular small town. And so we kind of showed up in Renner and nobody knew who the heck we were, and we didn't get super involved in the community. We've tried to be more involved in recent years as we see that, like, well, things are happening here in this community that we call home, and we're focusing all of our attention somewhere else. So yeah, so Renner's changing a lot, and probably for people who've been here a long time, they're probably feeling sort of overtaken by a bunch of new people who are not very involved in the community.
Anyone else have a question or comment on anything that we've been discussing so far, or something you think we should be discussing?
I've probably put all these people to sleep.
No, no. You never know. Well, let's move on to solutions, because I love solutions. What's being done around the country, and more specifically in South Dakota, vis-a-vis economic development, community development in rural South Dakota and rural areas?
Well, I think this may not be any surprise, but the big focus for economic development the last few years has shifted from jobs, which has always sort of been that measuring stick, to housing development and workforce development. So it's almost like we got too good at recruiting businesses, and now we don't have enough people or enough homes for people to live in. And one of the weird things about housing development in rural communities is that for a lot of those communities, they look around. So they hear people saying, hey, we have a housing shortage here, we need to do something about it. And they look around and they see, 20 empty houses in town and ask, how can we have a housing shortage? Look at all these homes. And so, it's in a rural community, it's a lot different from in, Sioux Falls or Rapid City or places like that, where housing is booming in the communities right around either of those cities, where it's about how fast can we build new homes. In rural communities, it's more about how can we have a conversation in our community about the homes that are here. Instead, because new housing construction is so expensive, the infrastructure is super expensive, takes a really long time for that community to actually recoup their investment. Often they don't have the resources to put in the right infrastructure, so it ends up being really piecemealed and not good down the road. But we have all these homes that are sitting here, and a lot of them have been empty for years. Maybe, mom moved into the nursing home and we didn't really want to sell our house, so now we just store all our stuff in it. Or
put our boats in the living room.
Right. Or maybe, we moved to wherever. We moved to Rapid City, but we didn't sell our house, and now it's really dilapidated and nobody should really live in it, but we haven't had the time or interest or resources to just take it down or to fix it up or to keep it up, those kind of things. So there's a lot of rundown homes. And what happens is we worked with the Housing Development Authority, South Dakota Housing Development Authority, and an organization, a company of consultants out of Owatonna, Minnesota. And they helped us to recognize that if you're in a rural community where you have, let's say, 40% or 20%, whatever number you want to pick, of your homes that are dilapidated at this moment, meaning nobody should really be living in that house. And that's a number that we see in a lot of small towns around South Dakota. Somewhere between 20 and 40% of their homes are in that dilapidated state. If you do nothing about that, the system will continue to move in that direction. And within 10 years, it's going to go from 20 to 30. And within 20 years, it's going to go from 30 to 50. And eventually, you're going to have mostly homes that should be knocked down, that nobody can be living safely in. And so, believe it or not, one of the first things that a lot of communities are doing that works around housing development is to create programs where property owners who own a dilapidated home can get it torn down and removed for free. Because the act of actually taking that dilapidated home down has a chain reaction to the homes that need some repairs and the homes that are in great shape. People who have a home in great shape will tend to keep it in great shape. People who needs to do some repairs will tend to do those repairs and make that a viable home for someone to live in, because they see that otherwise we're just going to tear this stuff down. And people who have those dilapidated homes are happy to have the city or the county or the development corp or a group of community volunteers tear that thing down, haul that stuff out, and now they have a blank slate, a lot that can be redeveloped, which is so much more affordable than new development. And so that's really a solution in communities that we didn't really expect to find when we set out, right? Like, I think a lot of local leaders assume if we have a housing shortage, that means we need to build more houses. When really, we need to get rid of some houses that we already have that are not safe, and we need to fix up so many houses that need some repair before they end up in that dilapidated category.
Those are things that our economic development teams and government and business and chambers can do.
Yep.
Because they are the ones who are familiar with whatever ordinances and procedures that need to be followed. I'm wondering, in these last few minutes that we have here, if you could give us some ideas of what each of us can do.
Sure.
That may likely not require anything except us doing it. What are the kinds of things that we can do to improve rural life?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we talked about earlier was murals. And so I think one of the things that anybody on this call can do is to, start something around art in your community. That might be a mural. It might be, if you're a gardener, it might be a different kind of art form, putting, start with one barrel on Main Street and plant a beautiful mini garden in there. And then ask the next door person if they want to do it, if you get them a barrel, right? And those kind of things. It may be a different kind of art, like the art of community, where I'm going to start this thing once a month on a Saturday morning where we're going to have coffee. And whoever comes, great, come. And we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about the future of our community over coffee, or tea, or whatever you want, because that's not a conversation that people have. They don't talk about the future of their community, even though we all want it to get better, or we want it to be strong, or we want it to thrive. We don't talk about it. We talk about the weather, or the ball game, or the crops, or whatever other silly thing that doesn't actually help us do anything to make our community better. So just the intentional act of hosting a conversation about the future of your community can spark all kinds of things. It gets people thinking about what they could do, or what they actually care about, or, whoa, we have this really sleepy little group over here that hasn't done anything for 10 years. I guess I'm on that group. Maybe I should spark something, right?
Yeah.
Like, just, buy some coffee for people.
Sure. Lee has her hand up. We only have a few more minutes. Lee?
Yeah, I'll make it very quick. I came in on the end of it. I want to compliment him as he's saying this, because some wise person told me 15, 20 years ago, the next 10 to 15 years are going to be the fastest, the biggest changes in the entire country that people have ever said. Not only fast, but drastic, or many changes. You have a great job, and I mean great by big and how do I say, very complex, because not only do you have a different kind of population, the land is different. The land is being used up, not necessarily properly all over. And hats off to you for doing this for our state. Wow. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, thank you, Lee.
Bye.
Thank you. And thank you. And that kind of brings us actually to the end of our program here. Joe, do you have any last words that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I guess so. First, thank you, Lee, and I'm really glad to hear that. I appreciate it, and thank also to Sherilyn who posted something in the chat. Thank you, and thank you all for taking the time today to participate in this. I think the thing I would share is I think of all of us on this call and anybody in any community who wants to do something to create community, to improve community, whatever that is. This comes from, so I call all of us community shapers, right? Like, we don't have to be leaders in community, but what we do have to do if we want to be in and part of a community is we have to do something. I have a friend who uses the analogy of a swimming pool. Like, if community is a swimming pool, you have to at least put your feet in and kick the water. You know, some people will cannonball right in, and some people will stay on the edge and just kick their feet a little bit, and everything in between. But if you want to be a part of a community, you got to put your feet in the water. You got to try something, do something, host something, say something. And so, and this comes directly from the conversation that Lawrence and I were in with a bunch of other rural leaders yesterday. Loving your community is not a passive act. It's a verb. Loving means you have to do something to make that community stronger and better for everybody who's a part of it. And so that's my plea with all of you as we wrap up today.
Well, I've just put in the URL for Dakota Resources. So those of you who are on the call still, if you want to copy it, or just in the lower right-hand corner, if you click on that and it says save chat, it'll save it to that. But it's dakotaresources.org. And you can go there and see all the kinds of incredible things that they're doing. And think about what Joe was saying about getting involved. You don't have to like start a huge project, even as far as something as low-hanging fruit as being at coffee and talking to people, or talking to people at church about, do a little something, help a kid or some kids paint something, you know, invite some kids to your house and show them how to make bread or something, you know, or let them in your shop and, you know, see how you do things. That connectedness is what makes us a community. And all of us, none of us can do everything. All of us can do something. Do that. Thanks. See you guys next week. Same time, same station.
Thanks, everybody.